Good morning, everyone. Molweni, goeiemorgen, and welcome to the Stellenbosch University and Consortium of Universities for Global Health Conference on African Global Health. I'm Professor Wim de Villiers, Rector and Vice-Chancellor of Stellenbosch University, and it's truly an honor for our institution to be the host of this event. This conference gives researchers, practitioners, and students the opportunity to showcase the most recent research and innovations from Africa and further afield. Our participants and experts from across the globe represent a wide range of health-related disciplines. SUGH's mission to support academic institutions and partners to improve the well-being of people and the planet through education, research, service, and advocacy aligns closely with that of Stellenbosch University. Our vision is to be Africa's leading research-intensive university, globally recognized as excellent, inclusive, and innovative, where we advance knowledge in service of society. Fora and conferences like these, this one being the first of its kind on African soil, aid us in realizing this vision. But more importantly, it also allows the opportunity to build and strengthen networks and to establish partnerships across the globe. And most important, it has the potential to have real-world impact and transform people's lives. The COVID-19 pandemic presented and continues to present a monumental challenge to global health. But it also reaffirmed the idea that we need extensive collaboration and strong networks to succeed in times of adversity. And at this conference, with the theme, Catalyzing Global Health Innovations for Sustainable Development, conversations and discussions will center on how to keep this momentum going. And at Stellenbosch University, the Center for Epidemic Response and Innovation, or CERI, hosted at our Biomedical Research Institute, brings together world-class scientists to create the largest genomics center in Africa. Its vision is to effectively respond to epidemics through pathogen genomic surveillance to enhance biomedical discovery, improving thereby the treatment, diagnosis, and prevention of human disease and generating economic opportunities for Africa. For a long time, our continent's capabilities and capacity for research has been overlooked. With developments like CERI and our ability to provide top-notch researchers with the tools they need to do cutting-edge research, as well as our capacity to host conferences like this is no longer the case. Established in 1956, the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at the Tygerberg campus of Stellenbosch University has developed into one of the leading health sciences faculties in Africa. It has a diverse student body of approximately 5,000 students who are enrolled in 5 undergraduate programs and 80 postgraduate programs. The faculty has been a member of CUGH since 2016 and joined Columbia University in the USA and the University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka, in co-hosting the 2018 CUGH conference held in New York City. Following that event, the need arose to provide an international forum that invites global contributions while highlighting African initiatives and institutions. And here we are. And I trust that you will find it informative and insightful. Finally, I'd like to thank the organizing team for their hard work. Without you, this would not have been possible. Thank you and enjoy.
Good morning. It's a privilege for me to welcome you to this wonderful event, which is going to address catalyzing global health innovations for sustainable development. It's a real honor to have so many international and national participants at this meeting, and we look forward to see you over the next few days, either virtually or in person. I am Elmi Muller. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine and Healthcare Sciences at Stellenbosch University, and have been part of the organizing committee of this conference. It's widely acknowledged that health systems of all types suffer from gaps between best practices supported by evidence and the actual delivery of health services. Many of these quality gaps are readily amenable to improvement, yet they persist in spite of increased levels of health expenditure and numerous other reforms in healthcare financing, regulation, and service delivery. The quality gaps take many forms, including failure to implement evidence-based clinical practices, fragmentation of services, slow and incomplete responses to adverse indications, and lack of attention to appropriate preventative measures. Many countries fail to offer their populations consistently well-coordinated, high-quality, cost-effective healthcare. Furthermore, the aging populations and the rising prevalence of complex chronic conditions has put increasing demands on the healthcare system and is changing the services that we need. Chronic conditions often require coordinated preventative, curative, and disease management services, provided in a variety of settings, personalized to the specific circumstances of the individual patient. The purpose of this meeting will be to look at some of these issues in 4 tracks: implementation of science and capacity building, non-communicable diseases and infectious diseases, human rights and equity, and environment and climate change. We will strive to have a coordinated, preventative, curative, and disease management service provided in a variety of settings with personalized care to the individual patient in all our sessions and to address these issues. We are excited to have some very important and very prominent keynote speakers who will be attending our meeting. Professor Thuli Madonsela, the Law Trust Chair in Social Justice, Faculty of Law, Stellenbosch University, South Africa. Dr. Elisabeth Sahtouris, evolutionary biologist and futurist from Chaminade University, Honolulu, Hawaii in the USA. Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman, founder of the Gift of the Givers in South Africa. Mr. Joe Tayok, Health Economics Advisor of United States. Professor Yogan Pillai, Country Director of the Clinton Health Access Initiative. And Professor Almin Steyn, Associate Professor and Head of the Division of Surgery at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Stellenbosch University. These speakers will look specifically at some of the details that I've highlighted before and how can we implement this in a sustainable healthcare program in the future in South Africa today and tomorrow. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for being here this morning, and we look forward to your participation in the rest of this meeting.
Thank you so much, Professor de Villiers and Professor Muller, for that welcome note, and welcome to all our delegates this morning who has joined this conference. To our online delegates, you are most welcome. And as we said, this is the Stellenbosch and the CUG Age African Global Health Conference. Before we start beginning with our first keynote speaker, I would just like to draw your attention to the chat box on your screen where relevant links will be posted, and you will also be able to put your comments or your questions or anything that you want to ask after the presentation in the chat box. I also want to alert you that those who have opted for CPG points, you can find the information on the website on how to register and secure these points. Furthermore, I would also like to alert you that all sessions will be recorded and it will be available for a period of 1 year. Without further ado, I just want to introduce you now to our speaker for this morning's session, who will be addressing evolution, cycles of maturity from holisties to harmonies. It is my pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Elisabeth Sahtouris, which is an international known evolution biologist and futurist, author, and worldwide speaker teaching living economies, current human evolution, and how to navigate our perfect storm of crisis. Following her postdoctoral fellowship at the American Museum of Natural History, she taught at MIT and the University of Massachusetts and contributed to the Nova Horizon TV series. Dr. Sahtouris is a fellow of the World Business Academy with an honorary chair in living economies and an advisory to ethical markets and other organizations. She's a co-founder of the Worldwide Indigenous Science Network and convened international symposia on foundations of global sciences in Japan and Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. She's also a professor of business at the Shanghai University in Honolulu. Her books include A Dance, Living Systems in Evolution, A Walk Through Time from Stardust to Us, Biology Revisioned with William Harmon, and a new book, Gaia's Dance. Without further ado, I would really like to welcome you, Dr. Elisabeth Sahtouris, and we're looking forward to what you're going to share with us today. So over to you. Thank you.
Mahalo, thank you, and aloha mai kaho from Hawaii, across the globe from you. My gratitude to Dr. Nyambura and her mom, Dr. Wanjiku, an old friend of mine. So I'm very, very happy to be able to come across the globe to you from here. And our theme being global health innovation for sustainable development. As an evolution biologist and futurist, I naturally think globally. So I'm going to start this keynote out on the real global issues, or the issues rather of our beautiful planet Earth. And I hope also to leave time after I speak within this hour for questions from the audience. I was told that that would be possible, that people would be able to put questions in a chat or somewhere so that we can do some dialogue with each other as well. So I think about the Earth within the great cosmos and we the people of Earth. And so I asked myself, even from childhood, who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we headed? And I had the good fortune in my childhood to live back when the whole world was eating only organic food, which is remarkable because many people today seem to think organic food is something new on the health scene and maybe not quite to be trusted yet. But I lived, being 86 years old, I have lived through a time when the entire world was eating organic food. And we had very healthy childhoods, being free to roam in nature. I could even take my mind up into a tree to be with a woodpecker if the tree was too high to climb. And I still have the mud of the Hudson River in New York State in the United States between my toes. That's where I grew up. And so I came, as I was taught the Darwinian story of evolution, to feel that there was something about that focus on competition, always on evolution being driven by competition, that felt too tight, not open enough. It was obvious to me that humans were very cooperative beings, and I didn't quite understand why we were limited to that kind of an evolution worldview. So I looked not only at my own Western science, but at other sciences in the world. Many Western scientists will say, what do you mean? Science is science. How can there be an other science? If it's possible for the technicians now to put up a slide I have made to make my explanation of this other sciences matter easier to comprehend. Are the technicians on board for showing that first slide? I'll give them a minute. Yes, here it is. Wonderful. In Western science, we actually have kind of two sciences running side by side, which is the standard model of physics, the Newtonian to Einsteinian worldview, and then the quantum theoretical worldview, which came in more recently. And both of them somehow seem to agree that the universe is made of vibrations. It's the one thing kind of everyone agrees on. So if the universe is made of vibrations, then we can imagine an endless keyboard of vibrations that you can arrange from the slow low keys to the very light high keys. And when we listen to music, we naturally think of the low keys as being earthy and the high keys as being more ethereal, don't we? And indeed, the ancient Taoists in science had this division of matter in the low, matter, energy, spirit. They weren't talking keyboard, but they had this matter, energy, spirit continuum. And Eastern sciences, which start from the spirit end of this continuum with cosmic consciousness, derive the whole keyboard by slowing the vibrations down from the non-material spirit consciousness soul down into electromagnetic energy and eventually into the world of matter. While Western science starts at the matter end of the same keyboard. You see, it's the same universe being looked at from different perspectives. So Western science starts in the low keys, proclaiming this to be a material universe, because, you know, no science can make any kind of a theory or much less have a hypothesis to test, to experiment with, which is what science does, of course, if they have no idea of what, say, a universe is. You have to have some concept of a universe in order to make theories about how it works, right? So any science rests on a set of fundamental assumptions, statements that provide you a kind of worldview of what your domain of science is. And of course, it is generally the whole universe and then the earth and people and so forth within it. So Western science, which posits that the universe is made of matter and energy, also declares as a fundamental assumption to be real, something must be measurable. And that means using physical instruments to measure it. And so the physical instruments can measure matter. And about 100 years ago, they were able, for the first time, to measure certain aspects of electromagnetic energy. Before that, it was seen as a kind of woo-woo stage show idea, and that hypnotists used and stuff like that. So then energy came into the Western worldview, but because it relies on physical instruments to measure what it's studying, it has no access to the non-material except in some very indirect ways. And we now can measure things like if so many people meditate together on the same issue, it can actually reduce the crime rate in that area. Little bits and pieces, we can measure the effects of something in the realm of consciousness and spirit. But it was fascinating to me that you could have different sciences, such as the Vedic science that the quantum theorists turned to, because Western science that they had been taught did not explain what they found when they broke all the way through matter and energy into this strange realm of consciousness where mind seemed somehow to be at work. And so they got that far, and they declared then that consciousness was a product of physical matter energy universe, that somehow consciousness emerges from material evolution into brains, and then consciousness somehow comes from nervous systems. While the Eastern scientists, as I said, the quantum theorists all acknowledged Vedic science from India as being better able to explain their own findings. So we see that the Vedic Indian science and the Taoists come to the opposite conclusion about the relationship of consciousness to matter. Western science says consciousness is a product of matter, material evolution, and Eastern says no, matter is a product of mind and consciousness. So I open you up to this possibility that actually nature is all of these things. Nature is a continuum of matter, energy, spirit. You are a continuum of matter, energy, spirit. You are not a mind with a spirit. You are a mind, body, spirit. So we can take the keyboard down now, I think, and I can go on with this background because I studied not only science from a university perspective, Western science, but I also did many years of work with different indigenous cultures. And I learned that they all understood nature to be this continuum of matter, energy, spirit, so that they could commune rather than communicate. Perhaps communication requires language of some kind, whether it's sign language, dance language, or a word language. Communion is the direct transmission of information. And many, if not all, indigenous cultures, because they acknowledged nature as being this entire continuum, could commune with trees, with animals. You know, the first time I went into the beautiful Amazon forest of South America, I was naive enough still to say to a beautiful long-haired Indian, "Can you teach me to talk to the plants and animals?" And he said, "Oh, shut up, Elisabeth, and listen. The conversation has been going on as long as this forest has been here. Your job is not to initiate it, it's to hear it and then join in." So can we take this slide down now? Okay, we can get on then. So the indigenous sciences, the other sciences, I investigated by convening a couple of scientific symposia in Japan and in Kuala Lumpur, looking at not only the fundamentals of Western science and Vedic science, but in Kuala Lumpur, we studied Islamic science. And interestingly, that while I now had a material-based science and a consciousness-based science, I discovered that Islamic science had a living universe perspective. Number one of their fundamental assumptions, Allah created the universe. Number two, Allah created a living universe and told us to study it. So I now had three different, very different sciences, and I thought, why is it that we can have parliaments of world religions? And I was in South Africa when you hosted the Parliament of World Religions, and I spoke at it because as a scientist, I also get to speak at that kind of conference. And so let's see, why was I going there? That the other sciences, yes, that I convened these other symposia in order to say, when we can have a Parliament of World Religions, why can't we also have a consortium of global sciences in order to produce some checks and balances, so that when Western science develops technologies that are not recyclable, that have too many toxic in them, that are making our planet unhealthy, then the living system science could come in and say, we love your technology, but you really can only make it non-toxic and recyclable. And we are a very, very creative species, so I absolutely believe that we can do that. And so I'd like to go back now and kind of look at the trajectory of Earth's evolution as I see it from my evolutionary perspective. If you say roughly 4 billion years for the linear trajectory of evolution on our planet, then half of that time was devoted only to bacteria-like creatures. They are called archaea originally, and they are so like modern bacteria that I like to call them archibacteria, or archibacs for short. And they went through a long phase of very creative and very competitive time when they invented amazing things, up to electric motors that our nanotechnologists are still trying to reproduce because they're so much more efficient than our motors. And we know them, for instance, in the tails of sperm are run by such molecular motors. Anyway, they were invented by ancient bacteria. And so was the first World Wide Web, because the bacteria were all in communion with each other and were able to self-organize because of that. They also developed things like nuclear piles because they collected radioactive materials and they left them behind in their layers. And so they actually created nuclear piles. And so the first World Wide Web and nuclear energy and electric motors and all those things, but they also caused two huge global crises during that time. First, they ate up all the free acids and sugars that were lying around and fermented them. The earliest archaea or archibacs were fermenters. And then along came the next series of them that I call those the bubblers, because you can see fermenting bacteria making bubbles, right? And we still use them. We still harness them to make beer and bread and things like that. And so then they, after eating all that food up, they had to figure out somehow to survive. And some of them figured out how to make food from what was left, which was sunlight and minerals and water. And they invented, guess what? Photosynthesis, right? They were able from that sunlight to produce food. And they gave off a gas that was toxic. So they solved the food problem, but they were so successful, proliferated so widely over the surface of the planet, that their gas, their give-off gas, their waste gas of oxygen began to pile up in the atmosphere for the first time. And that was toxic to the bubbler bacteria. I'm calling these next ones, oh, wait a minute, how did it go? The blue-greens, yes, because they were making photosynthesis. It's what plants do, right? So the bubblers were harmed by it, and they had to go underground to protect themselves from it. And some developed kind of sunshades. And anyway, so they caused first global hunger and then global pollution. Isn't it fascinating that we are the first species since those ancient ancestors to create exactly the same two problems? I find that absolutely fascinating, and an issue really about health, right? Because we have to make our planet healthy again after having made it unhealthy. So along come a third kind of bacteria, and they take this oxygen gas and they turn it to good use to break down chemicals and develop the third way of life, which is respiration. I call those the breathers. So we have bubblers, blue-greens, and breathers in sequence. I thought that up for children, but it makes it easier for grown-ups to remember it too. Now, after 2 billion years of all of this inventive, creative stuff that we think of as primeval sludge, and yet so much went on in it, 99% of the molecules in the world today were already invented by them billions of years ago. A few new ones, like I think hemoglobin, a couple of them are relatively new, but most of all that was invented back then. And then the big evolutionary breakthrough, when those bacteria actually started to form communities, they, and I don't want to go into the details again, but they end up jointly creating the nucleated cell, which was much, much bigger than individual bacteria. So the bubblers and blue-greens and breathers got together and formed these big cells, and they became the first nucleated cells on the planet. And of course, you know that we are made of nucleated cells. Now, ever since that time, both bacteria and nucleated cells lived side by side on the planet. And the formation of the communities by the archibacs The formation of the nucleated cell is the first big leap into cooperation. But those new cells are new on the planet, so they're young and they have to go through their own youthful phase of competition and creative invention for another whole billion years. 3/4 of evolution later, finally we get the multi-celled creature as the second big instance of forming community through cooperation. And the rest of evolution you know about because you learned about it in school, and it goes through the creatures in the sea and then coming onto land, and then the flowering plants and the insects and all of that. So you know the rest of it. So that is the basic pattern of evolution, is that there is a maturation cycle where species and whole ecosystems go through youthful competitive phases and then end up maturing into cooperation. Just as we humans think of our adolescents as it's okay for them to be feisty and competitive and creative and think they know it all, and then they have to somehow mature into peaceful community citizens, right? We know this. We know this from our bodies. And our bodies are kept healthy by our bacteria on our skins and in our guts. We have 10 times as many bacterial cells as we have nucleated cells, and they are responsible for repairing the gut lining, for making vitamins, for running 80% of our immune system as it's been calculated. So we cannot do without them, and we must learn to love them instead of assuming that all bacteria, all microbes are bad. We have to recognize how utterly dependent we are on them in order to stay friendly, and then figure out how to cope with those that get unfriendly, okay? And in a way, we humans, you know, well, let me go through a couple of other basic things about science, about evolution. After the maturation cycle, I want to talk about holarchy, which is just embeddedness, the embeddedness of entities, living entities within each other. So you have cells in your body. The cells are made of molecules and groups of them, organelles, which were once free-living bacteria, as I explained. Your mitochondria, for example, were once free-living bacteria, and they gave up some of their DNA in order to function in the cell, dependent on it, but working to make its energy from the food you eat and things like that. And they also issue a cellular currency called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, as most of you know. And that currency is worth learning about. Everything I know about economics and politics, I learned from nature, mostly from my own body, which is a highly ethical system in which this holarchy of molecules in cells, in organs in organ systems, then the whole body, and then bodies in families and communities up to the whole world, and then planets within planetary solar systems, and all the way up to the cosmos. This embeddedness, this Russian dolls or onion skins, is holarchy rather than hierarchy. Your brain is not in command of your body. It's an information clearinghouse. Indeed, the ancient Greeks saw the heart as the intelligence of the body, and the brain as a cooling organ when the emotions got out of control. So there are so many ways of looking at these things when you study other cultures, and you realize that there have been bright minds in so many different human cultures. And especially, I have learned so much from indigenous people. So when you understand holarchy, you see that in your body, there are 24/7 negotiations going on between the self-interest of every cell and the self-interest of its larger community, which is like the organ, right? So everything has to meet self-interest, but it must negotiate that with community. So just as your term Ubuntu is about yourself within community, there is no self without community, right? The body knows that, and every cell knows in itself that for the body state to stay healthy, every part of it must stay healthy. And so these negotiations go on 24/7 through the clearinghouse of the brain. that then shows where hormones maybe should be produced and something's up. And none of the cells ever complain about extra attention or resources going to an injured part of the body, because they know that that has to be healed. Just as we know that when one person in the family is unhealthy, we need to put the resources there to restore the health, whether physical or mental, so that the whole family can stay healthy again, right? We know these things, and we know many of them intuitively through life experience. But when you see it scientifically, once you get this, how this individual and community negotiation must always happen, because I think you can all answer the question of what happens when some of the cells stop negotiating, stop meeting self-interest, and turn to selfishness. And we all recognize that as cancer in the body, when some cells no longer negotiate with community, but only proliferate their own kind, their own way, my way or the highway, and they get the blood vessels to feed the tumors, and they do everything only for themselves rather than for the body as a whole, for the community, the larger community. So that's important to know for health. And then I want to talk a little bit about economics. Nature is profoundly conservative with things that work well, and it's radically creative with things that do not work. Actually, I'm starting with politics when I talk about this. Strangely, in what we call democracy, we vote every 4 years on whether to be conservatives or whether to be change agents, progressives, when that should be a constant negotiation in friendly division of labor. Let's look at each issue and say, is this working for us? Do we want to protect it? Then those who like being protectors should work on that. And if it is not working for us, then those who enjoy making change should get to work and change to see how can we improve it? How can we make things better? What needs to be recreated here? And of course, now we're facing knowing that we have become unsustainable as a whole economy. If our politics would study nature, then we wouldn't have a situation where two parties are considered to be enemies of each other and only one can rule at a time. You see, you've got to take politics and economics from nature. So look at economics. Look at the words ecology and economy. They both come from the Greek words ekos, which means household. And the ancient Greeks understood household holarchically: the family household, the community household, the city household, the global, the gods in the skies, their household, right? It was a holarchic notion of household. So ecos plus nomos makes economy. Our economics are ecos, household, with nomos, the rule of the household, the laws by which it operates, the rules it makes. And ecology is ecos with logos, which is the design of the household. So ecology represents nature's design, and economy is what are the rules by which it runs. We humans took those two things apart, and we made our economy superior to ecology and saw nature just as a set of resources for our use to exploit. Okay, that's how we got into trouble and did so much damage on the planet by, it's a selfish way of being in the world. If you turned that upside down and fit our economy into the ecology, into the ecosystems, that's the way it should be, that the planet which sustains us must come first. It has 4 billion years of experience in healthy living system creation. And we've now given it a fever. So this is a matter of planetary health. And if we turn that upside down, we get we fit our economy, in other words, into ecology, then we know that we have to make things without toxics and that we must recycle it all. Okay. And I call that flipped over way of working on and living on our planet as a lifestyle for humanity, an ecosophy, which is household ecos with Sophia wisdom. It's the wise way for us to proceed on the planet. And we know that. And we've been through now this pandemic, And we know that for the first time when humans are locked up, we saw how quickly nature can regenerate itself. The skies got blue, the pollution disappeared, right? We saw our effect and how well nature can undo some of our bad effects if we allow it to. And some people have actually proposed that we need to set apart half of Earth to regenerate. And there are people who have worked out ways that that could actually be done with corridors between them to connect us and things like that. But anyway, that's what we have to do. We have to flip that over and become a wise society. We learned through COVID also to elevate caring and caretakers to heroic status. We've never done that before. We've always had kings and generals on, on their high horses. We've had hierarchical views of things. And now we see that we need the carers, the caretakers, that we need to develop human sociological systems, social, political, economic systems that are about caring and sharing. Again, the spirit is of Ubuntu, right? All of us in community. So these are some of the important things that I wanted to get across, and I'm very passionate about climate change. I was good friends with James Lovelock, who started the Gaia hypothesis of a living Earth and who just died on his 103rd birthday. That's quite an achievement. And so we did a lot of dialoguing and worked together on conferences and things. And he was a great climatologist. I don't always agree with all of his engineering model versions of nature, but he was a great climatologist and really understood the hydrological cycles that are at play on the planet. And most climate scientists don't even talk about the hydrological cycle. For example, the wind belts that used to rotate around in the polar regions now have so much evaporated ice up in them as extra moisture that they have fallen closer to the equator. And that's why you get floods in places that you never had floods before, right? So you have to understand how the whole thing works. What's the relationship of the ocean to the land and to the currents in the ocean, and where the warm flows, where the cold flows, the current that goes up the Atlantic between the United States and South America and Africa. In the Pacific there are currents, and in the Atlantic there are currents. And these currents, the Gulf Stream pump on the east coast off the east coast of the United States and Canada is now getting weaker and weaker and weaker from the melted ice, the salt-free ice water that is coming down, so that those layers, those thermal layers, are changing. And so we need to understand this is a water planet, and we need to understand that sea level rise is not going to happen gradually, a centimeter at a time, so that we can say, oh, in 2030 it will be here, and in 2050 there. Of course, they keep revising the numbers on it. But indeed, what will happen is that the sea level will rise 1 to 3 meters at a time. A huge tsunami may come down from ice falling into the oceans and cross the ocean where there are no obstacles. And then as it rolls in, and when it goes out, it leaves an extra meter or 2 of water behind. So 13 of the largest 20 cities in the world are at sea level. And the only one of them that has taken managed retreat seriously, because they will lose piers and airports at the same time, and there won't be any imports from this crazy economic system that we have through the World Trade Organization, where everything is dependent on being shipped around the globe rather than local self-sufficiency, which is the healthy way to go. And so the piers and airports at sea level will be done in, and then the city won't function at all. Here in Hawaii, we are importing 80 to 90% of our food and energy. And a lot of people, like myself, are working hard on trying to get more self-sufficiency. But the way our human economy works is the World Trade Organization rules means that the banana company Dole, say, that was had to leave Hawaii after poisoning the soils here and now produces bananas in Central and South America, they can be subsidized to import bananas back to Hawaii so that our local apple bananas, which actually taste much better, are more natural, are more expensive than the imports because it's called protectionism. You're not allowed to protect your local products against the imports. So one of the big things on the agenda for us is we have to live by different economic rules, and we have to get much more locally self-sufficient. We have to learn from indigenous people how to live well in our own ecosystems. Hawaii had an original version of bioregionalism. Every island has high peaks and then seashore all around, and the rivers and streams that flow down were the borders of the farms, so that every farm had the trees on the top and the fields in the middle and the seafood on the shore. And that was a very equitable arrangement that followed nature. And then when the colonists came in and took over, they said, oh, your fish ponds are making mosquitoes and we have to fill that all in and put hotels on this beach, and destroyed the natural self-sufficiency, which had as big a population when the Europeans and Americans came here as we have today. So we know that our islands are capable of it. And South Africa is capable of it. And so is almost any country can produce enough food for its own people. And then you work on fair trade among these groups. So I don't want to go much further. I do love the concept of Ubuntu, as you hear, and it's very like Aloha in Hawaii. It's about community. It's about service. It's about compassion and humility and love and all those good things that we now have to work on for our health. And we have to look at pandemics to see whether there are natural traditional remedies that work. Indeed, there is at least one African remedy that I know of that works on COVID, and there are supplements that you can take, and many doctors in the world were healing COVID patients and then losing their licenses and being portrayed as people giving out misinformation when they were actually doing very good research and proving that there are different ways of healing, that Western science is not the only way. And so we have to make our choices and figure out what works for us in Western science and what works for us better through indigenous science or old out of patent drugs. Hydroxychloroquine, for instance, was taken daily by every US soldier throughout the Vietnam War to prevent malaria. And it's interesting to me that there are several long out of patent and proven harmless drugs that were effective and still are effective on COVID. Why is it, and here's a research challenge for somebody to work on in the health field, why is it that the anti-malarial drugs are the ones that work on COVID? What is it about the COVID virus that the body reacts to it as though it's a parasite coming in? These are the questions that we need to open up our science again, not to close down dialogue. Science can't operate when you close down dialogue. And yes, everyone should back up their statements with good research, but it's available, it's there. And so is it possible, I'm asking the technologists now, for us to have some questions for me? If I stop lecturing at you, I've said quite a lot. Yes, now there's an invitation to post questions in the chat box. And perhaps somebody here on the staff has a question for me while we're waiting for the audience.
Yes. Dr. Elisabeth, thank you so much. That was such a fascinating presentation, and just for reminding us again about the interlinkages between health and economics and planetary health and politics, which is so important. Maybe just from my side, I would just like to know that you mentioned these interlinks and really interjections between these three things. But maybe just from your point of view, you mentioned that our economic crisis is an opportunity that we should explore for new things and new opportunities. So in this economic crisis that was also underpinned by the COVID-19 pandemic, how do you see us using this opportunity to rethink our relationship between health and economics and planetary health, and also the interconnections of community that you so beautifully illustrated to us?
Yes, I think we have recognized our interdependence much more in these last few years. And we have developed things like these wonderful platforms so that we can actually talk to each other around the world without having to physically travel. So one of the big things that we have to think about now is how much energy reduction can we make? How much of our energy is going into products that we really don't need? Do we need 50 pairs of shoes? Do we need endless tchotchkes or new things? And do we need to buy new toys for our kids every 6 months, right? So a lot of the new green technologies, which of course are important for us now to focus on, cleaner, greener ways, we have to be very careful because, for example, electric cars. Do we want more cars and cars that have to be built from rare earth metals and things that require mining, more mining? Or should we think more in terms of lightweight public transportation, to whatever we can do to reduce our footprint, right? As we build these local caring, sharing communities, not rushing across the planet, but thinking globally. That means local self-sufficiency, but you want to be able to communicate with the rest of the planet because we can share ideas. For example, I have a friend named Ross Jackson who identified all these little eco villages around the globe and then funded them to connect with each other as GEN, the Global Eco Village Network, so that they can share information with each other and so that people who are thinking about local self-sufficiency can connect with them to see what problems have they solved so that everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel as we develop our strength in our communities. You know, we've been told that we're not cooperative, and yet we live in hives of cities by the millions. And we cooperate all day long. We stop at traffic lights. We pay at the supermarket. We say hello, friendly ways to each other. You know, we're cooperating. And we don't even see that we're a cooperative species because we've been blinded by this Darwinian competition. And by the way, Darwin late in life said, the beautiful task of humans was to introduce ethics into nature. And I'm saying, oh my body is such an ethical community of trillions of cells that work in harmony. That how could he have missed that? So you know, we're creative and we need to update things, but some things we need to go back to, like getting the toxics out of our food supply. To what extent can we now grow organic gardens by ourselves? The UN actually about 10 years ago issued a report saying the only way to feed the billions of people on the planet in the future is through small family farms. They said that at the UN. I haven't heard it talked about much since, but the idea of monoculture is a bad human idea. And the idea of separating plants and animals in our agriculture created two problems from one solution. we now have to artificially feed the plants and animals because they can no longer feed each other, as on the old family farm where the soil never deteriorated. It always became, if anything, richer because the plants and animals were allowed to feed each other. You see, and one of the things that I find happening in my world now is that there are people fighting food wars by claiming that only one particular diet is good for the planet. And I say everyone fighting for healthy food should be on the same team, because there's a danger when you, for instance, if the vegans tell us we must not ever eat animals, and that is if that's a health choice, I'm all for it. But it's not necessarily the best choice for everyone on the planet and for the planet as a whole, because these monocultured, artificially fed and fertilized, toxically fertilized plants, as well as the animals locked up, the plants are also tortured in these monocultures. Their soil is no longer rich. They can't feed off the worms and microbes and bacteria in the soil and minerals and vitamins and things like that. The soil becomes almost sterile and is just a holder for them to stand up in. And the plants are tortured. That's not how they should be living. They need to get real healthy food themselves out of real healthy soil. And so everyone fighting for healthy food should fight for healthy plant raising and healthy animal raising, preferably in the same place together, the way nature evolved it to be. And then let each person figure out what works best in their own bodies to decide, so that it's not a my way or the highway for one particular diet. So these are all, there's so many interesting questions that arise as we try to figure out how to stay healthy on the planet, right?
Yeah. No, fantastic. And I absolutely love your idea of emphasizing natural self-efficiency. And I think it's so important for us. So thank you so much. We also got a couple of other questions. And I'm just going to go to the first one, which is from AfriCorp Health Strengthening. And I don't know the individual's name, but the question is, how can you summarize this relationship between consciousness and matter? And how do we apply the highlighted principle as researchers and Western scientists?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we talk a lot about how to integrate science and spirituality, which have been separated. And when you look at the keyboard, you see that the question is not how to integrate them. The question is, why did we separate them? Right? When you look at the universe holistically, there is no separation. As I said, you're a body, mind, soul. You're a body, energy, mind. You're all of those things. You're not one having the other as some kind of an extra possession. So it's hard to talk to Western materialist scientists about these things because they're not used to it. They haven't heard of it. And they don't recognize the keyboard. They only recognize the matter and energy part of the keyboard. However, the quantum physicists have led the way, and none of the standard model physicists will tell you quantum physics is wrong. So you can call upon quantum physics to demonstrate that Western science actually, through the quantum physicists, came upon the whole keyboard. Right? And insist on having these conversations, point it out that it's there in quantum science, and they've had a very hard time figuring out how do we integrate quantum science and the standard model of physics, right? Look at the keyboard. And so it takes conversations, and it takes open-mindedness. It takes, you have to work with those scientists that have somewhat an open mind and get yourselves together and show them that it's there within Western science already through quantum physics, is what I would say.
Thank you so much. Then we also have a next question. Climate change advocacy seems to be not one size fits all, depending on the global regions, for instance, Africa versus the West. And what is your general comment on climate sustainability that cuts across the globe? And that
Well,
is from Juliet Nyansula.
Okay, thank you for the question. And of course, climate change is a global issue, and it has to be faced locally. That is absolutely correct. If you're living in a mountain village, you don't have to worry a whole lot about sea level rise, but you may have to worry about your water supply. If there's no more snow and ice on the mountains that are feeding your river where you're living, then you have to worry about whether you're going to have enough water in the future. And you may have to look to ways to collect water. You know, the ancient Greeks on islands, not all the islands had wells, had water on them. And they figured out ways of like, they would suspend a sail at an angle over the sea, and then have, when the sun was beating down on it, water would condense on the inside of the canvas sail and run down off the edge where you could collect fresh water. Now, nowadays, we could use a big sheet of plastic or glass to do a similar thing. Dew collects at night, and if you put a sheet over the grass such that you can pour the water off, you know, make a tint so that the moisture will collect inside it and then run off it. You have to look at ways of making fresh water. If we can, here in Hawaii, we have a man named Ken Ostabo who has worked out a way to pull deep sea, very clean deep sea water up onto a solar powered ship and desalinate it on the ship and then pipe the fresh water onto the shore. So we're creative. We're a creative species, but we have to think about what our problems will be. If we want to be self-sufficient, we have to look at the issues of food, water, and shelter, right, and health. What is going to keep our immune system strong? Because the best defense against disease is strong immune systems, which means healthy food, right? And if you eat healthy food and you know the natural remedy plants and you put them into your garden along with your food, you know, these are things to think about now. Talk to the native elders in your community or near your community to find out how did they heal the various diseases, because they learned from nature. And it's often said in indigenous cultures that the same thing that's a toxin in nature will have its antidote close by. So yes, we must work on climate change locally. Of course, you can talk to people around the planet about the more global issues. So far, I have not seen any technological solution to climate change. Every time we think up some technological way of stopping climate change, it turns out to cause more problems than it was solving. We can't put giant sheets of plastic in the air to ward off reflect the sun off, you know, without worrying about where's that plastic sheeting going to fall down on. You know, it would take awfully big ones. Or to lay it on the ice, is that going to work as the ice melts it? You put white plastic in its place. We have to rather think about adaptation. Humans have been through a dozen or more ice ages. I don't know if people are aware of that, but an ice age is on the whole about 6 to 8 degrees colder than what we consider normal on the planet now. And a hot age is about the same amount hotter than what we have now, right? So it's within a range that human life can probably continue if we don't kill off the oceans. We must stop the pollution and damage in the oceans. This is a water planet, and it's worth fighting very hard for protecting the ocean from our toxins. From pulling up that plastic and recycling it is what we need to do. Rather than making new plastic, we need to do much better at recycling. So all of those issues of recycling, and our concrete and glass and metal should also be recycled rather than doing more mining, right? So there are many issues, and I say, you're right, Dr. Juliet, that there is no one size fits all. Somebody who's interested in politics may want to elect better officials, and someone who can bake bread may want to make bread for their community, and someone who wants to experiment with food forests, which is something now we're developing a lot on Hawaii, to have the different kinds of food trees together as well as the vegetable gardens. Because, for instance, breadfruit is probably, I don't know, do you have breadfruit trees in South Africa? Have you ever heard of a breadfruit tree? You may call it something else. It's a big starchy fruit that has no pits. The whole thing is like a white potato in it when it's almost ripe, and then turns mushy, like a sweet potato that's been mashed when it's really ripe. Do you have such trees? If you don't, look into growing some, because they're an amazingly prolific staple food that is very, very versatile. The ancient navigators in the Pacific took them down around sailed around South America from Hawaii and other Polynesian islands in these little canoes with no compasses, and brought these to the Caribbean about 200 years ago. And every Caribbean family has a breadfruit tree in their yard, because you can live off it, you know, and it's no work agriculture. You can sleep under it until the fruit drops on your head, right? Indigenous people were very good at finding food supplies that required very little labor. Nature is bountiful. So look into not just things like permaculture gardens, but into food foresting, especially the trees that grow relatively fast, like palm trees and bananas and, you know, good things like that. And of course, your climate is part of your, you know, your local condition, your elevation, your climate, what was grown there before the modern times. You know, what did people grow long ago? Find out what were the local staple foods. You may find that you can grow much more than the local staple foods, but make your agriculture more diverse. Don't do monoculture. Okay, we have another little time for a few more questions.
Yes, thank you so much. The next question is from Emma that asks, what are you thinking about sea mining, nature versus economy? We even do not know so much about the deep sea and the possibility consequences of sea mining. More and more results are showing how complex the deep sea is and how it is connected to the ocean circulation. And thank you, Dr. Martin, for also responding on that in saying that UNEP and IBES have done some excellent work showing the damage deep sea mining has on the marine environment.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think we should be doing any new kinds of mining at all anywhere in the sea or out. We've found enough things under the earth for us to incorporate into our economy. We don't need more. We need less. We need to downsize our economy. And now we've so toxified the oceans, and there is no mining process I know of that doesn't have toxic wastes and effluents and stuff like that. So adding to the pollution of the ocean is a really, really bad idea. I would fight that tooth and nail. It will not have good consequences. No, I don't think it's a good idea at all. And yes, of course, the deep sea is connected to ocean circulation. By the way, I just met a young lady at a breadfruit conference here who was on the deepest dive ever vehicle, the recent one that went down into the Mariana Trench. They actually went 7 miles, 11 kilometers straight down. That's the deepest part of the ocean. And I have on my desktop now a picture of that blue-black sea with a little light from the boat to make it blue-black rather than black, and a plastic bag on the floor 7 miles down. Plastic, undissolved. That's how bad it is. And of course, the microplastics are the worst. 80% of the pollution on beaches is microplastics. And you have to be careful about recycling. There's a wonderful clothing company that tries so hard to be natural, and they were recycling plastic bottles into fleece jackets. And then it turned out every time you washed them in a washing machine, they were shedding tons of microplastics into the effluent water from the washing machine. So they had to rethink it, like electric cars with all of those rare earths that it takes to make the navigation equipment. We really have to think and do our research holistically, not in a narrow way, but have deep dialogues about where we want to go from here. We have time for one last question.
I don't think there's any other questions in the chat anymore. It's just another comment from Charles to say that he's glad to hear the amazing effects of the breadfruit trees, and if it's the same fruit we call ukwa in Ingu language in Nigeria.
Yes. Yes, they do have tiny seeds, but those seeds are so small that you eat them without noticing, right? And yeah, it's interesting that you call it ukwa because we call it ulu. So it also starts with U here and has 2 syllables. It is ulu here, and it has slightly different names elsewhere in the Pacific. And we're working very hard to maintain this as a native food developed by the indigenous people, because the big corporations have cottoned onto this breadfruit as being low glycemic index and no what is it everyone's allergic to now in wheat?
Gluten,
no, non-glutinous and highly nutritious and all that. By the way, I think the natural ancient wheats don't bother people. It's the new genetically modified wheats that have caused all that gluten intolerance. So we have to watch out for these unnaturally farmed monocultures. Go back to the native, and what the person asking the question probably knows. In Hawaiian, we have the term mana. The mana is the spiritual energy of the plant. And Western science tends to analyze the plant and decide what's the active ingredient and, only propagate that part of it rather than the whole plant. And when these big corporations want to raise these breadfruit trees in big hothouses under artificial conditions, forcing them to grow faster, they will not do well when they're planted out in the fields. And we want to we can work with you from here in the Pacific, where the farmers are really now trying to protect breadfruit as a native food and not allow the big corporations to patent it and raise it unnaturally, because we want to keep that spirit as part of the food. It's what nourishes us. Mm-hmm. So if I may just make a closing remark or two. One of the things I learned from Polynesian sailors who sailed all the way around the world, including to South Africa, and that was the hardest place for their canoes to get by because of your 2 ocean currents meeting and having some very rough weather off the Cape, right? And they did it. And they docked everywhere, teaching malama honua, which is care of the planet, care for each other and the planet. That is the message that they spread in their flexible canoes that rode those waves, because nothing is bolted together on these canoes. The pieces are lashed together so that they can be flexible on the waves. And they had many, many ways of reading nature when the stars were covered, and they had to navigate by seaweed floating and the deep swells and below the surface waves and the clouds that formed over islands. And then they said, if all else fails, stand tall in your canoe until you can see your destination. And if any of you think you cannot move your consciousness up higher, remember the nice Hawaiian beach you played on during a dull lecture? We all know how to move our consciousness. So when you feel that you're at the bottom of a dark well and things are looking hopeless, stand tall in your canoe until you can look down on this human drama and discern the waves and eddies of what's happening in the world, who's trying to take it over to build a great corporatocracy, and who's developing the wonderful, holistically managed survival. Like look up the Sarvodaya communities of Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, 15,000 villages based on two principles: inner peace and generosity. That's all. I'm a peaceful person. What do I have to give to my community? In Mondragon in Spain, spelled like my dragon in French, Mon dragon. That is urban cooperatives that base their principles on loving human relationships rather than communism or capitalism, and have been successful for 40 years. The Eco Villages, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, BALLE. All of these things are happening now in the world as role models. So you can discern that there are these positive things happening, and that as they spread around and the corporatocracy fails because it's utterly dependent on its own technology, while we're getting less technological for the time being, then you can, whatever you are inclined to do, as I said before, whether you're into politics or poetry or computer repair or whatever, there's a place for everyone. What makes your heart sing, if you do it toward a better world, will make you an attractor for others who want to come and work with you. So make your heart sing as you build this better world. Don't let yourself get depressed. Focus on the positive things that we can do. And let's do it together in community, because that's what keeps us alive and safe and friendly.
Thank you so much. Ubuntu, I agree with you. And thank you so much, Dr. Elisabeth, for just reminding us again of the fascinating interconnectedness between human beings, between our planet, reminding us again to think of our planet and to think of ways on how to enhance that and embrace that and naturally live and protect our planet that is so precious to all of us. And this was such a fascinating talk when you started off just talking about the cells and the humans and the ecology, and I was just so excited. So thank you for that eye-opening presentation. And thank you also just for reminding us of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it brings us together as social beings and as a holistic human sociological system. I also want to really just quote some of your work in one of your papers specifically about COVID, that you said, why do we stay in prison when the door is so wide open? And I think we should take up that challenge and think about it, ponder about it, and really think how we can use that in our daily living. And then as you also shared your staircase and your keynotes moving from high notes to low notes and vice versa, I think it's just so important for us to see that interconnectedness in the cosmic and how we can connect these different, our soul, our spirit, science, and the world together. And one beautiful quote I want to, with your permission, just from one of your butterfly worlds say, is that you mentioned, if you want a butterfly world, don't step on the caterpillar, but join forces with other imaginal cells to build a better future for all. And thank you this morning for reminding us that we should build a better future for all, and thinking about the macro and the microcosmic, and use all those elements with our Ubuntu spirit to embrace and to enhance what we have been given on this earth with the combination of knowledge, science, and what we have as our abilities and our skills as human beings. So thank you so much. It was a great honor to have you this morning. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you so much, Dr. Elisabeth Sahtouris, futurist and evolution biologist, and a worldwide speaker that has really graced us with your presence this morning. So thank you so much.
On behalf of the Havey Institute for Global Health at Northwestern University, we would like to congratulate Stellenbosch University for organizing this timely and important conference. We are proud to be a sponsor of this event and value the deep collaborations we have with Stellenbosch faculty. Congratulations to all of the presenters on your hard work. We look forward to interacting with you throughout the conference.
Northwestern University has a decades-long partnership with Stellenbosch University, which extends into many areas of education and research, with both institutions benefiting from the academic rigor of the other. Our robust, long-standing student exchange program brings medical, public health, and engineering students from both institutions to live and work in Stellenbosch and Chicago. Our medical and public health students rotate at Tygerberg Hospital, the primary teaching hospital of Stellenbosch University's medical school, in a variety of departments, and at the Hope Cape Town Project, which strives to improve the quality of the life of children, youth, and families affected by HIV. Our engineering students come to Stellenbosch for a hands-on experience in developing medical devices to improve health outcomes in resource-limited environments, particularly townships around the Western Cape. Students work closely with Stellenbosch University faculty and local health professionals to aid in the identification of healthcare needs of local clients and develop rational and appropriate design projects. Stellenbosch faculty also bring their expertise to Northwestern students by teaching in our graduate online Master of Science in Global Health program. They focus on research methodology, grant writing, development, and fundraising. Stellenbosch is a major partner with Northwestern on another large project referred to as the Center for Innovation in Point-of-Care Technologies for HIV/AIDS at Northwestern, more commonly referred to as CTHAN. This program supports the development of a pipeline of point-of-care technologies designed to meet the clinical needs of people who live with HIV/AIDS in low and middle income countries. This is a program funded by the National Institute for Biologic Imaging and Biomedical Science, a program that's part of the POCTRIN network, which is the Point-of-Care Technologies Research Network. Faculty at Stellenbosch have received pilot funding to develop better point-of-care tuberculosis diagnostic devices for low and middle income countries. Stellenbosch has also partnered with Northwestern on another large program referred to as the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics for Coronavirus, commonly referred to as RADx. This is an initiative which aims to speed the innovation in the development, commercialization, and implementation of technologies for COVID-19 testing. In these and so many other ways, Northwestern continues to value the partnership with Stellenbosch University and hopes to expand and enrich that relationship in the years to come.
you.